come in and listen to me talk about 10 examples of bad design and how to avoid them. So just to get started, I've got a few stats that kind of show why this content is important for you, your business, your website, or your marketing really, and across different aspects of it. So I'll try and get a little bit of audience participation here, see if you want to get involved. So the first one here on the top left is X% of first impressions relate to your site's web design. So anyone want to have a shout out? How much do they think percentage-wise? 90, it's a good one. 70, nice. It is actually 94, so you're very close there. So, and as well, this one ties in nicely with it. So, it's a time-based thing, something point something something. The number of seconds for users to create an opinion about your website. So, any guesses? Nice. It's very small, 0.05. So, putting those two together, the first impression relating to your site's web design. So that's not your content, that's not anything else apart from that initial design. So things are obviously colours, imagery, branding, everything that goes along with those. And they make that decision instantly. So you need to make sure that that's right from the off when people are interacting with your site. And then over on the right hand side, so X% of consumers believe that website design is crucial for a business's overall brand. Anyone? Yes. What was that, sorry? 28, good guess. 50 is. So 50% believe design is crucial for your overall brand. I'm sure you've all experienced this in terms of when you go to a company's website, if it doesn't look well designed or it doesn't look quite professional, you might be put off using that business and just go and look for another business to use instead. And finally, what percent of users are more likely to return to mobile-friendly websites? Anyone? 65, good guess. 74%. So all the things that we're talking about here, they relate to both desktop and mobile devices. Obviously, design is kind of universal, so it's going to affect the mobile experience as well. So let's get cracking. So bad content hierarchy is the first one. What is it? So your content hierarchy on your website, it kind of affects two different aspects. So it's what the user sees and engages with, but also there's a bit behind the scenes in terms of how kind of search engines and people who have accessibility needs will interact with the site content as well. So it's an incorrect layout of content. So I've butchered a page off of the WebBox website here as an example, and to show kind of what it looks like from a reading point of view. The headers sizes are all over the place, and it doesn't really flow in terms of which content sits together and how it all relates to each other. A way that I like to sort of explain this to people and describe it is if you've used Word documents. So within a Word document, you've got your different heading types, which obviously creates kind of like subsections of your content, as well as obviously paragraphs, lists, all these different content types that you can use. So within a website, you also have this heading 1 to heading 6 hierarchy, and you should use that within your content to sort of list it and give it its importance. And like I say, yeah, the content doesn't flow naturally. So on this page, just to highlight the different content areas, types that we've got a H1 here, halfway down the page, H2 and 3, and then this is kind of like a paragraph. So that sort of looks like a heading, and it should be a heading, but it's using a paragraph tag, which is for this kind of content. One other thing is, like I mentioned, accessibility. So there should only ever be one H1 tag on any web page that you've got on your website. The reason for that is it's going to basically be the purpose of that page. So people who maybe are blind using or have visual impairments, they may be using a screen reader. And the way that a screen reader works is that it basically filters through headings and reads it out to the user until they find one that they're interested in, and then they'll stop and it will go into the sort of content that goes along with that. So it will start with the H1 and then it will move to the H2s and then down to H3. So it's really important from accessibility of all your users that that's done properly. And a way to avoid it, like I say, is using the correct heading type. So make sure that your content flows in those sections, and as kind of content comes into sort of sub-content areas, you're using those H2, H3, H4s to separate that out. One of the effects of this is, again, is SEO also. So it's said that when Google kind of scans your website and scans your content to give it context, it will use things like headings to give context to the paragraph text with it. So what that means is that it doesn't necessarily, if you do this properly, you won't jump to the top of Google, but it's about making all these kind of small incremental changes that will help you. And if somebody is searching for your particular content, Google will have that context and it will drive them to that content rather than skipping it. And also it's just easier to consume. So this is the unbutchered version of our page, and as you can see, we're using H2 and H3 correctly. So as the content kind of goes into subsections, we break that down. And also we've used a list and a block quote. So obviously lists are great to list out information and show it in an easily digestible way for your user. And block quotes are always a good thing to pull out key information. So it's about kind of that engagement again, getting people to maybe read that quote and then they want to explore further into the content and access more of it. Number 2 is lack of UI consistency. So what is this? It's where you have no unified style across your website. So this can be things from icons, and that is another point within this talk on its own, but as well as things like imagery navigation. So hopefully you don't come across this too often, but navigation on some websites can kind of chop and change as you go through different pages, which you don't really want to do because it creates a disconnected user experience. It should stay the same. You should see the same pages throughout the whole experience. And because of that, the user experience suffers. So, it can be confusing. There's a disconnect as to where they're going. They may want to access certain pages, and when they've navigated away, that's then hidden. They can't get back to it. So it's just thinking about, again, that kind of user experience. I've done an example here, again, on our website. If I just play this. So this is from the homepage of our website. And it's quite simple. So the person clicks on About. The navigation's moved, and I'll show you what's changed. One of the navigation items is missed, and the free digital audit link has changed as well. So if I just go to the next slide. So these are the two differences. So, like I say, actually on our website, when you click through to any of these pages, that navigation, it stays there throughout the whole user experience. But as an example, when they've gone to the About page here, the service link has disappeared and the button styling has changed. So it's about keeping that consistency throughout so that the user knows what they're looking at and can interact with those elements. And how do we avoid this? So creating a style guide. So this is one that hopefully is relatively straightforward, but there's quite a lot of people that we've spoke to in the past that don't actually have a style guide. And it's essentially a document that will outline how to use all of your branding. So it goes from logo, positioning, different color backgrounds, how that should interact, as well as your color palette, content, everything within there. And this will cover all of your marketing materials as well. So it's not just a website. If you're putting out any social content, if you're doing any printed materials, this will cover all of that and give that consistent sort of like branding and UI across all of your materials. And it also means you're future-proof. So if you change designer or you go to a new agency or you get a new designer in to work on something, they can use that style guide to make sure, again, you keep that consistency throughout and they don't just like throw a random color in or change a style as you don't want them to. Number 3 is irrelevant imagery. So what is this? This one should hopefully be fairly self-explanatory. It's using imagery which is unrelated to your content. It doesn't actually back up what your content is saying or what your brand is doing. And it creates a disconnect between the content and what the user is sort of interacting with and what they're reading. So we've got an example here of kind of fashion website. Obviously you've got people wearing clothes and related to fashion. As an example here, I took our web development service web page on our website, and we've put a picture of a dog in the header. So obviously that is not related to web development at all, although he is a very cute dog, so you never know, you might get some leads from it. But it's obviously completely irrelevant. It doesn't mean anything to the content, and there's a bit of a disconnect between that image and what the user is interacting with. This is the actual page. So we've got a picture of our developer Sam here, working on some code, building a website. And it's obviously much more related to the content and to the web page, and just helps that connection with the user when they're reading it. So how do we avoid it? One way is to create your own imagery. I know that's not always very easy, but a lot of the images that we use on our website are within our office. They're our team. They're actually doing their jobs. So it relates to all of those pages, all of those services. And if you can't do that, it's just making sure you source imagery which is completely relevant to what you're doing. And again, make sure it complements the content. So it needs to go along with that. I think some other examples I saw online were where someone was like selling weights, but they had pictures of bananas on it or something, and it just makes no sense whatsoever. So just make sure that whatever imagery is used across all marketing as well, again, it complements that content and goes and helps deliver the message for it. Number 4, confusing icons. So we've touched on this a little bit in the UI consistency, but what is this? So bad icon choice. This can obviously work in various different ways, but a good way to kind of explain it, and again, a little bit of sort of audience participation, is a lot of you probably know or have an idea of what you would think these icons are for. So the magnifying glass would be search, yeah, nice and easy. The sort of person in the circle at the top is probably like profile. This one, everyone would know, like play. You've got sort of like image, directory. So there's all these kind of icons that people know. Then there's other icons like this that might not have any sort of meaning. That could be Harry Potter, we don't know. So it's using icons that like people know, people are used to using, and not just some random icon that comes out of nowhere. The reason icons are important as well is, again, with that stat of mobile sort of usage overtaking desktop usage. With a much smaller kind of real estate on a mobile phone, icons are becoming more and more used because it's much easier to get a message across or deliver something without putting loads of text in place. So you need to make sure that the icons you're using work for that. If you're using bad icons, then it can slow down the interaction with the website, and it will frustrate the user. So if they don't necessarily know what it is and you're not really telling them what it is, then they're not really going to want to interact with it. They may just jump to another website and do something else. So how do we avoid it? Universal icons. So like I say, those kind of things like search, favorite, add, play, location, all the kind of things that we are used to using across lots of different designs. Make sure that you're using those and don't go for something like completely out the box, something completely crazy. If you do need to, because you may have a service that you want to sort of reflect with an icon, and it's not something that is as widely known, use labels. So you can, something we call tooltips as well, is just as you hover over it, it will sort of open up with a piece of text that will tell you what that is. So if the user obviously is on a desktop, they hover over that icon, it'll tell them what it is or what it's going to do for them, and then they're less frustrated. They've got that information, they can click through and interact with that without worrying what it's going to lead to, essentially. Number 5 is cluttered design. So what is it? So cluttered design is something that was really common in the kind of the 90s and the noughties. And people essentially, mainly with web design, were just putting as much information as they could as possible into a web page. The idea of this is that they were trying to kind of appeal to everybody or give everybody all of the information that they could. But the problem is that this kind of takes away from the focus. So you're just sort of bombarded with information. So you either switch off and you don't actually read any of it, or you just disappear and go to another website. So you want to make sure that it's much more focused. So how to avoid it? So white space, breathing space was a big thing that came into design over the last sort of 10 years. And there was definitely, when it started to happen in design, big resistance to this from the client side. The reason being, again, they wanted to put all of the information on there and make sure that sort of call to actions information was everywhere on the page. But it's about splitting out that content, giving it a bit of room to breathe so that it stands out more for the user. So they can focus on what the content is telling them, and they don't sort of get overwhelmed. And a big thing with user experience and UX on a website, you've got to really think about how you want your user to interact with the website. So think of their journey through it and how you can kind of guide them on that. So if you've got too much information, they turn off. But if you give them key kind of content that you want them to interact with, engage with, then they can move through that journey and hopefully leads to a lead or a sale at the end of it. Number 6, bad form design. So this one is a massive bugbear of mine. The amount of forms that you come across online that are badly designed is crazy. This is one from the WebBox website again, which I kind of butchered as an example. And you've got to think, with forms on your website, they are a source of lead generation. So you want to make sure they work. You want to make sure that they're really easy to fill out and that users will fill it out and not just kind of get frustrated, get bored with it and just run away. So examples of the bad design are not using standard elements. So you might try and design a form which looks sort of like completely unique, it's different. But you can then confuse the user. So they're used to using specific sort of like text inputs, file uploads, checkboxes, all these kind of things that you're used to using around other websites and other areas of the web. So it's like trying not to sort of break that mold and get too crazy with it. And no instructions. So this is one that frustrates me. So on this one, I took out the kind of title of the form. If there's any instructions as to please fill out this information, we'll get back to you within X hours or X days, whatever it might be. And as well, I've made this purposely horrific. So the idea of that is it's an error message. Which just says error. So if you serve that to a user, they're just going to get really annoyed. They don't actually know what the error is, so they don't know how to correct it. So the guiding them and using those instructions effectively so that they know and they're comfortable how to fill out the form is key. And I also made the send button just sort of blend in there because you could very easily miss that. You want the send button, like any call to action, to really stand out, have a background color, have something about it so that people will see it and know that that's where their goal is to click it. So as a better example, this is what you want to do. Again, you want to make it easy and simple to use. So there's now a title on this form, there's instructions of how to fill it out, and as well we've got an asterisk for the mandatory fields. So a lot of forms you come across, you don't know what you actually need to put in it until you get to the end, you hit send, and then it says, oh, actually you need to put your phone number in, you need to put XYZ in, and that's just frustrating again for the user. So it's about adding that information in and making sure that it's super duper clear what they need to do to complete this form. The information is key, like I say, so the error message here is red, it stands out, it tells the person that field shouldn't be blank, they need to fill that out. And the error message and feedback. So I had this a few weeks ago where my wife was applying for some new jobs, and she's a pharmacist and she was filling out this pharmacy form and she was struggling with it, couldn't get it to work. So I was like, oh, let me look, it's probably just user error. I get onto it, it was the worst form I've ever seen in my life. It was absolutely terrible. There was no sort of error feedback. You submit it and it kind of just looked like it did as you'd filled it out. You didn't know if it'd been submitted or not. So all these things do happen in real life and they should just, it's just horrific. They should be sorted out. It just creates frustration and pain basically for your users. Again, the send button there is sort of like big green background, stands out from the rest of the form. So somebody knows to click it, and then also once they've sent that, you get a thank you message. So you could be as descriptive as you like in this. If you know that you've got a sort of turnaround time of 24 hours, 42 hours, put that in there so that the user knows that you're going to be in touch and when you're going to be in touch. And also, if they're putting their email in, you could follow that up with an automated email. So that may send to them. They know that you've got their inquiry. And they're sort of happy in the knowledge that it's been sent, and you'll be following up. Number 7 is not knowing your users. So what is this? So not knowing your users is quite a common one, and you find a lot of people, especially in all kind of design elements, but especially websites where you've got a bit of a user journey and a goal on the site. They design it for themselves, and not necessarily for their target audience and their users. So it's about knowing who you are designing for, and again, what you want them to do on the website. The user journey comes into this, so if you've got the incorrect user journey, if the goal of the website is to either sell a product or for lead generation for a service, you need to take that in consideration and make sure that the way that the content flows, the way that the journey flows, is to make that process as easy as possible for the user. And you get no engagement. So again, if that user journey's not very easily succeeded, and the content's not very good maybe, or the navigation's not very good, the user's going to turn off and they're not going to want to engage with your website, with your business. And again, there's millions of others, so they will go off to Google again to find another business. So one way to avoid this, user research obviously is a big thing. That's probably easier said than done. So there's an element of kind of knowing your target audience and who you are actually targeting. So whether that's demographic, whether that's age related, where they live location wise, it's about defining that and knowing who your branding should be for, who that user journey should be for, and what their goal is. You can also do A/B testing. So this is something where when you've got your website built, you can do testing of 2 different versions of that website. So it could be your homepage could be completely redesigned and served to kind of 50% each of your audience, or it could be as simple as you just change an image in the header area, or you change a call to action wording, or the color, or the design around that. And what happens is, as people use that, it builds up data around which is the most effective. So then it's, if you change an image or you change a call to action, you can see that option B has had 10% more engagement than option A. And it allows you then to make, again, these kind of like small incremental updates and improve that user journey over time and understand the audience and how they're interacting. Number 8 is unaligned elements. So this one, again, hopefully is like fairly self-explanatory, but in terms of the design, if elements are kind of out of a line and not designed properly, it just looks unprofessional. So like we said at the start, in terms of those stats that people consider design as super important on your website, if it's not quite, if the design doesn't quite work, or they look purposely or unpurposely out of line, I suppose they shouldn't be out of line, it kind of looks unfinished and broken. So the person's kind of reaction will be, is this company actually care about what they're doing? It doesn't look professional, it doesn't look very good. So in order to avoid it, we use a grid system. So grid systems came in a good few years ago now in terms of design, and with responsive design between desktop and mobile, we use the grid system to make sure that, again, all elements are aligned, but when you move down to mobile, the kind of elements react accordingly, and you get the best sort of experience on a mobile or a tablet device. And test. So you may have elements that need to be slightly out of alignment, which is fine. It's more the things that should be aligned and are kicked out. So when the site has been designed, everything is perfectly aligned and it all looks lovely. When it then moves to the kind of development stage of the HTML, CSS, some things might get lost in translation. So let's make sure that you test that across all different browsers, lots of different devices, and make sure that the design that you originally envisioned has been translated into that website, and it makes it look much more professional, like I say. Number 9 is no use of contrast. So what is this? It's where everything blends in together, basically. So obviously the core colors that you're going to be using across your website are going to be related to your brand. But this also affects page elements as well as text. So obviously in terms of page elements, if you've got maybe a sidebar and a main content area, you want to make sure that there's a distinct split between those 2 sections. They don't just sort of blend into one, and the user can't really tell what they're looking at, essentially. But as far as text, this is one that comes out quite a lot, where you might have a paragraph of text or a text page or a blog post or anything on your website where you've got a link within the text. A lot of the time I've seen they kind of just blend into the rest of the text, so people will scroll past and they'll miss it. You want to make sure they stand out. I'm sort of moving on to the next slide here, but you want to make sure they stand out, and again, they don't just blend in with the rest of the text. And it's bad accessibility. So accessibility, a lot of the time we talk about people with screen readers or sort of like deaf or visual impairments, but accessibility affects everybody. So if they can't access that information easily, you want to make sure that, again, things stand out and it's much easier for them to read. And I've just used a quick example here from our website again. So on our guide to documents page, this is the actual page. So we've got the blue banner across the middle of the page here, which separates out the content and the footer, with the call to action in the middle. And I've just removed that background. So where everything is kind of blending in together, it's hard to see what should I be looking at, what is the kind of core content here, and as well it sort of merges all of the content sections into one, where you want to keep those separated out. So how do we avoid that? The use of colour obviously comes in a big way here. So like I mentioned before, if you've got a sidebar and a main content area, just don't have it so that the background of both of those is white, so they both blend in together. You know, the sidebar can have a darker hue in the background. Also, you could use like borders, things like that, to make sure that there's separation there, and spacing and gaps. So again, this comes down to that kind of cluttered design. But giving content enough space to kind of have its own area is key there as well, in terms of being able to sort of like engage with that content and interact. And it just makes things more visually appealing. So all of these things come down to, again, that user experience and making it as easy as possible and as nice as possible for people to use your website or marketing. So it's just, again, making things like this contrast is making the core elements and the core content that you want stand out, and make it easier for your user to read and interact with. And number 10 is forgotten accessibility. So again, obviously accessibility touched on a few times throughout the talk, but this is something that is hugely important. So there's actually, I did look it up, I think 11 million internet users in the UK alone with some sort of impairment, whether it's deaf impairment or visual impairment. So it's important to consider these things so that you're getting your content and your website out to the biggest audience that you can. There's no use of standards, so there are tons and tons of tools that you can use online to test your website for accessibility. And a lot of the things that we've already touched on kind of lead into accessibility as well. So there's things like alt text, which you might have come across in terms of on imagery on your website. So that'll be, you basically describe what is in the image. So if someone's, again, using a screen reader, it will tell them what's in that image. A lot of the time you'll get people do put alt text on, but it'll either just be something completely irrelevant, or it'll just say like marketing image, or something that doesn't make any sense. So it's about saying what it is. So I'm just thinking of that puppy images in my head for some reason. But it could say picture of a golden retriever, looking up in the sky. And not only does that help accessibility, but also thinking of search engines as well. When things like Google index your website, they'll look at those alt texts to give context to images. So it can also help if people are searching things on Google Images. It will help those search rankings as well, which obviously can drive people to your website. Correct content and color. So again, like we touched on the hierarchy, make sure that the kind of headings and the text and the markup behind the content that you're putting on the website is correct. And then color. So one of the big things in terms of accessibility is color contrast. And again, this is not necessarily for, obviously, if you're completely blind, you wouldn't see it. But if you've got color blindness or slight visual impairments, things like color contrast will massively help. So you don't want sort of yellow text on an orange background. It's going to be horrific for anybody to read. So it's about, again, these tools will tell you what kind of ratio you should use between those colors, so that it passes kind of accessibility checks. And the blind and deaf users. So the accessibility for me within the web industry has always heavily been on blind users, so people using or visually impaired, using screen readers. But literally in the last kind of 6 months, deaf user accessibility has come into play as well from my point of view. And there's lots of tools that are being created to try and help this. And it's a tip that might be useful for you guys is there's something called Speechly, which a lot of the kind of hearing impairment tools or techniques that people use are things like adding transcripts. So if you've got a video or a podcast maybe embedded in your website, it's adding transcripts so people can read that. As well, things like subtitles on video, so all these kind of like the basics. But the Signly tool, you basically send off your web pages to this company, and they send back a video of someone doing sign language for that content. So a deaf user can click on a certain part of your content, and they will, like a little person will appear in the corner, and they will sign it back to them. I was quite surprised with this, but I didn't actually realise that if you're born deaf, your first language will be sort of British Sign Language or the variation of sign language that you live in. So English is actually like their second language. So it can be challenging for them to interact with just text-based websites. So again, if it's a sort of target audience of yours, it's really worth knowing that and having a look into those elements. And how to avoid it, kind of touched on some of them there, but using accessibility checkers, like I say, you can run your URL through these and it will fire back a report. So there'll be things that are kind of like need urgent attention, things that are medium, and then things that you've passed. And it just helps you to look at those and make some updates where needed. It's considering all your users, so again, it's about getting your material out to as big an audience as you can. You don't want to necessarily segregate people out of it. And get the basics right. So one of the things which you should really concentrate on is just making sure that those basics are in place. Things like alt text, color contrast, just get those on the website. And then if you want to push into kind of AA accessibility, that's something to have a look at. If you want to go AAA accessibility, you probably wouldn't necessarily want to do that unless you're like a government body, because it's basically just like black and white web pages and they don't necessarily look as interesting, but that might be the field that you're in. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you found that useful.